So Scott Miller, welcome to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. So good to have you with us.
I'm grateful to have this opportunity.
Hi, Scott. It's lovely to see you. And they're holed up in, by gosh, you could be holed up in that office for years. Look at that lovely set of books back there.
I'm in the bunker, hiding out from COVID-19.
Right.
Yeah. I'm in my bunker too, but it's much smaller.
So Scott, for our listeners, just where are you coming from? Where is your bunker?
I live in the city of Chicago.
Okay.
Originally grew up in California, but I've been here nearly 3 decades, actually. So I feel like Chicago's now home.
Wonderful.
Now we've given a brief introduction to all the amazing stuff you're doing, but there's a lot of special stuff going on, and it's too difficult for us to describe just in a brief interview. We've talked about your FIT program, the ideas of deliberate practice, and but what was perfect was you've got another book out. I mean, we've got the other one at the evolution at the Erickson conference a couple of years back, but this looks fantastic. And with your wonderful colleagues, Daryl Chow, who's Australian, we're going to grab him as well, and Mark Hubble.
Right. Yes.
I'm thinking that's a great framework just to go through some of the stuff. But I wonder if you want to just sort of start out with what the book is, where it's coming out, what your framework, where you're at with it at the moment. And then we've got a bunch of questions.
Sure. Better Results is, I feel like, the summary of almost 2 decades of research that our team has done. Originally started after I left the Brief Family Therapy Center in the early 1990s. Our data had shown that while we were effective, we were no more effective than anything else. And it really threw us for a loop, looking for primarily how we could get better at what we did. Because, of course, I'd been trained and I thought that the best way to improve my results was to learn to do the right thing with the right problem, with the right person. And it turns out that didn't seem to be the case. And so Better Results summarizes a bit of that journey, but it's also a really practical book. It tells you the steps you need to take to figure out how effective you are, and then to identify the weak spots in the work that you do, the kinds of people that you're not as likely to be as successful with, the types of problems perhaps, those moments in the therapeutic encounter that you may do less well or manage less well than others. And then helps you create a plan for developing exercises that you can then repeat and try to successively refine skills in that particular area.
Right. Yeah, this idea of effectiveness in therapy is something which of course, I've become more engaged with the Ericksonian tradition through my lovely apprenticeship with Ernie Rossi, and as you know, but this idea of producing therapy that's effective. My wife and I wrote a paper about 7 or 8 years ago, which was roundly refused, where we made the argument for the initial framework is to create beneficial change. So we had all kinds of lovely graphs and pictures and arrows, and anyway, it wasn't considered to be productive. So this idea, first of all, I thought, as you talk about effective therapy and creating something that works, what's that mean?
Well, let's think about the context and the theories that our work are currently embedded in. Because, in fact, it's curious, I had an email today from somebody who shall remain nameless, who said, is anybody at the Evolution of Psychotherapy Conference actually been shown to have better results than anybody else? And, of course, the answer to that question is no, and it's a curious one. But the problem with the question is that it acts like that's a novel question. Our field has assumed since the outset that if you did treatment right, then the outcomes would follow. And if they didn't, at least it wasn't your fault.
Right.
And I say that in jest, but I also mean it seriously, because what the medical model does, which is what psychotherapy, the sort of cultural context in which psychotherapy emerges, is it absolves you of responsibility for the outcome as long as you've done what you're supposed to do. As long as you've got the correct diagnosis, applied the correct treatment, well, then it's not your fault, which also, as we know, leaves only one other person in the room to blame.
Right.
And that's the client. Now, we don't actually call it blame. We call it other things. Their resistance, their attachment disabilities, their neurologic shortcomings, blah, blah, blah. But the effect in total is essentially the same. It's not us, it's them. We'd be effective if they weren't so damaged.
And this is the thing, isn't it? Coming from the medical model, emerging from all of the assumptions out of the medical model has, brought us to this place. And I'm wondering, are there other models of working with people that maybe should have been the basis from the very beginning?
And, when you start to gather and look at the research literature, it really highlights the inadequacy of that particular model, that model being that the diagnosis a person has, we have to have treatments that are specifically remedial to that. And that works kind of okay in medicine, although not really. We know that the process is far more complicated than that. It involves people, their background, their cultures, their worldview, clinicians who vary morning and night. So yes, there is an alternative model that seems to fit the facts a little bit better that have been gathered over the last 50 years. And that model is known as the contextual model. Results occur within a context. That context is far broader than the client's problem and the treatment approach. It includes the persons that are involved, the place that the care is occurring in. By that, I mean not only the face-to-face place where most clinicians do their work, but also the cultural context in which the work takes place and the backgrounds of the clients. So the contextual model, I think, is a far better fit, and it turns our attention to factors outside of this model for that problem. It turns it to, well, what is it about the therapist that is uniquely effective or not with this particular person? But believe it or not, that whole line of research has been stymied over the years because therapists were viewed as a nuisance variable. What we were supposed to do is reduce the variability between clinicians so that they would be delivering the pure treatment, similar to a physician giving an antibiotic for a strep throat. It shouldn't really matter. Theoretically speaking, if it's a male or a female therapist, the cultural background of either person, it shouldn't technically matter. But in psychotherapy, those are the ingredients that matter. And we have to attend and connect. And most importantly, from a deliberate practice point of view, we have to be able to find out when we don't.
Yeah. I think, as you know, I've been saying for quite a while that I think the tail is wagging the dog, and has been doing for a while time. And it's even the fact that we simply are looking for a model that from the therapist's point of view, that really it goes, for me, it goes into the client, but that's another story. But I want to go just straight to part one, because... And I want to read it, like an actor who reads the words differently, because you've got state of the art and the state of the art. And I want to go, what's the state of the art? It's because I think this is what you're getting at. What state is it in? Yeah.
Well, it depends what the question is about that state of the art. If the question is, are therapists effective? The answer is yes. If the question is, are we getting better? The answer is no. Both in a group or aggregate level, is our field improving in terms of our results? And do therapists specifically improve over time? And the answer on both counts, despite widespread belief and often beliefs held with great confidence, is no. We're not. So we have lots of creative ways of working. And all of those ways don't seem to offer an advantage, a leg up to clinicians, which makes it curious, because my view is, and my experience, my own and other clinicians, is they're deeply interested in helping others. Who gets into this business for many other reasons? You're not in it for the money typically. And if you are, you probably need to see one of us about that. But they really do want to develop. And what do they do the minute they want to develop? Well, all of the marketing, all of the advertising is, here's the latest method, here's the latest model. Oh, and by the way, we just added this sort of, it's not diagnosis X, but X point A and then X point A dot 1. And we have to know all the permutations to be effective in that special, this stuff just has not allowed us to be more effective. So I don't think it's for a lack of desire, and neither do I think it's for a lack of will. I'm impressed that clinicians keep going to these trainings. I'll say one more thing and then I'll be quiet, and that is
you're supposed to keep talking.
I'm good at that. When a therapist signs up for one of these continuing education opportunities, I always wonder, why would you assume that it's all uniformly up? That there's always an upside to it. In fact, the evidence should be, if it's a training that could impact you, well, there's a 50-50 chance that it might interrupt really virtuous patterns in the work that you do, which is why before you go to a training, the next step after the state of the art has to be that you have some baseline assessment, not your internal assessment, not your supervisor's assessment, not what you think your clients say, not what you have hallucinated, but rather some formal measurement of your results so that we can actually slice and dice those results and find out where your growth edge is, where there are opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I did that workshop a couple of times ago at Ericsson, which was almost everything I know in psychotherapy I learned in acting school. And people sort of laughed and joked, and it was surprising how incapable therapists were to improvise. But the essence of it is, and I just put this, I know, Matt, you've got a question, but I just want to do this one. Because when you're acting, when you're moving up to do a play, we do exactly what is being done in the sort of therapeutic education. And if anyone's seen the movie by Al Pacino, Looking for Richard, we go through and you learn, like he would go and learn how to speak in iambic pentameter, learn about Shakespearean times, learn about this. And we would do this. In rehearsals, we learn about the character, we learn about the background, we learn about the ins and outs, we learn about what we've got, we learn about what they've got, yada, 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 for weeks and weeks and weeks. Then on opening night, we forget all that and let something emerge. And that becomes the performance. And to my mind, that's kind of what you're talking about with that. You use, I mean, then the directors tells us what we've done wrong, and then we absorb that and we improve it the next time. When you said deliberate practice, when you say things like outcome ratings, when you talk about feedback stuff, it didn't. I've just thought, well, yeah, sure. Don't you guys do that? And just a last little brief thing to say, that a lot of the stuff that Scott is saying, perhaps sounding glibly like, therapists don't improve and time doesn't do this, that's very well founded. We'll have links to your website where they can go and see all these fabulous research backgrounds that verify.
Yeah, it may be too late, Richard. They may have already turned off the podcast, because when I talk about these things, they're simply inconceivable, and that's part of the issue. It's our internal experience tells us I'm getting better. The data indicate clearly most are not. And actually, over time, they slightly deteriorate while their confidence increases. There's no more toxic pattern possible if growth is what you're aiming for. And there's some very sound, not only research, but psychological reasons for that. So,
right. Yeah, and I think this sort of strain, again, just jumping back to the acting metaphor while we're in it, is that we have audiences. I mean, we have as we go, moment to moment feedback. But of course, if we come in the next night and there's fewer people and fewer people and fewer people. Now, in the experience that you've found with these using these rating scales and frameworks, because how does the therapist utilize these responses that are coming to them, the degree to which the client returns, various other things? You incorporate that. Now, is this where do we look in the outcome rating scale? We look at the feedback.
Well, we have two scales. we have two scales, and the reason for having these particular two is based on some research findings or science. The first one is about when change happens in treatment, and so it's probably important to measure it, because we know that most of the time if a therapist is going to be helpful, it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And secondly, research on the alliance, which it turns out is the construct that separates really super effective therapists from average therapists. Both, when we've produced a couple of simple versions that you can measure and get from my website if you like. So aside from the mechanics of doing those, the purpose of measuring is twofold. We know, for example, that therapists who are more responsive to the individual client have better outcomes. That means you are having to improvise a lot in the therapy to connect with the diverse clients that you see. Now, any improvisational actor knows that they're not creating those improvisations from whole cloth. They practice a variety of things, and then, as you say, in the context, hopefully those merge and come together in unique and innovative ways. But responsiveness is the first thing that the measures give you an opportunity to do. How? You're charting progress, you're charting measures of the relationship. If the client gives you feedback that they're not making progress or not connected with you, that means time to have some direction. Time to have somebody say, the way you delivered this, the way you said it, how you're interacting isn't connecting with this particular person. So responsiveness is the first thing that measurement gives you, to go back to your original question. The second thing measurement does is it allows you to establish a baseline, and that's where we started this conversation, meaning that once you begin to measure, you can slice and dice your outcomes and look for where you fall short. Think of it this way. There are random errors and there are non-random errors. A random error is who walks through your door. You can't really control who walks through your door. Yeah. Clients control and what they bring in control about 87% of the variance in psychotherapy outcome. That means that responsiveness is a skill that's huge. And what the measures help you do is it tips you to say, improvise here, change the improvisation here. And the second piece is a non-random error, and that's a mistake you simply make over and over and over again. That means you're probably going to have somebody help you figure out how to act differently in those circumstances, how to escape that pattern that you engage in. And it might be a pattern, as we say, based on the gender of the client, their sexual orientation, their cultural background, and a host of other variables the list is virtually endless, really. Yeah. That if you became aware of that pattern, had somebody help you develop some skills to work differently around it, perhaps your outcomes would improve.
Yeah, and this is where this idea, the tail wagging the dog, is that the therapist is waiting for the client to conform or comply or act, do what they're supposed to do, what the book says they're supposed to do. And I oversimplify, because I know a lot of therapists have got way beyond that thinking, but that's the principle of the teaching. And this idea that the client is, the client has got something going. I mean, I don't want to sort of make this all about acting, because it's not the point, but it is the great metaphor, is that people say, where do all these therapies come from? And where did you learn them? See, when I say that thing about learning in therapy, I can learn about CBT, and I can learn about ACT, and I can learn about DBT, and I can learn about all of this from Shakespeare. It was we've been doing this for a long time. It's this way we've turned it around to isolate. And if I can just shift down a couple of chapters, the expertise, we've talked a little bit about that, better results using that baseline. But that next chapter, I really like, what to deliberately practice. Now, there's two things there: deliberate practice, and if you could speak to that, and then what is it that we're deliberately practicing? Are we at that point we can discuss that?
Well, the what is important to identify, as my colleague Daryl Chow says, before the how. And so the what you're going to practice depends on what your baseline study reveals are shortcomings. Right. And right now, continuing education is based on the belief that you can all benefit from learning this. Now, very long ago, I would sit after having been a therapist for 10 years with other therapists at these workshops. And I can remember having discussions where they'd say, I figure when I come to these things, if I can learn one thing, then I feel satisfied. One new idea, one thing. And that's become the standard, really, for most experienced therapists. I can just take one nugget away. That's kind of sad, really. Really, what we need to do is learn one thing that fits our deficits. And the data indicate we're not very good at evaluating that. So once again, we're back to measurement. And I'd also say that the hardest part about deliberate practice is really having a system of deliberate practice, something that occurs automatically. Again, I think most therapists really work very hard. I don't say that as to try to add puffery into this. I see them work really hard, but clinical practice is not the same as deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is something you have to set aside time to do, and you have to do it every day the same way, day after day. And the biggest threat to deliberate practice really is that we don't plan it. It's not automatic. And because it's very unfun, most of us find loads of other things to do instead of deliberate practice. But virtually every superior therapist we've met, along with a variety of other performers, and I mean that in any human endeavor, have time set aside that is a time that is not, it's not possible to interrupt those people during that time. It's sacred, those 15 to 30 minutes, where they're working at their edge.
Yeah, very true.
I think we talked the last time we were together, and I don't want to claim that I'm some great person when it comes to deliberate practice, but there was a presentation that I was doing at the Evolution Conference, the last time the Evolution Conference was held. And when I told people that this 1 hour presentation I'd spent 2 years practicing, people were thinking, this is not possible. But it was possible. That's what I did.
But you also utilized a coach.
I did, which is part of the deliberate practice process. So you got to identify the what. That's the top of this pyramid, and then you have to have individualized learning objectives, and then you have to typically involve a coach who can see things that you don't see, both the areas in your performance that are weak, as well as help develop exercises that are going to flex that muscle and help you develop skills around that. Without that, there can be very little successive refinement over time.
Now, in the profession, the psychotherapeutic psychology and various other forms of mental health, we use someone called a supervisor.
Yeah.
Now, is that in the same frame? I know when I do supervising, and I do it more like a coach than I do like but that's the same frame?
That particular term has so much baggage in our field. Ideally, would it be a coach? Yes, but that's not what it has been in practice. Generally, what it's been in practice is primarily, at least in the States, a way to ensure that you're not hurting your clients, so that it's helping you become a member of the profession. The second way that's been dominant is, I'm going to teach you how to do this method right. And the supervision is all around you, hewing closer to the theory and the protocol in the particular treatment. And so when we're referring to a coach, I'm thinking of something quite different. Somebody who can actually be atheoretical and point to areas, this is critical, that have leverage on outcome. And model and technique has very little leverage on outcome. Of all the variants that you could work on, modeling technique contributes less than 1%. So, that's not where I would start if it were me and I had no idea about what my baseline was. But you're likely going to need to be like an Olympic athlete nowadays. An Olympic athlete doesn't have one coach. No. They have a coach for strength. They have a coach for equipment. They have a coach for perhaps
psychology.
Dance. Yeah. Yeah.
But absolutely, just bringing that one in, a coach for dance. This is absolutely true. And we've seen that with footballers. I can't remember there was whether it was Australian or American, but they actually got a ballet coach in to work with these great lumping guys. And they all started to find this other element. And certainly, this is the work that I'm struggling with, where we're negotiating at the moment. But this concept of possibilities, meaning those things that are not those things that we know or we have had some experience in knowing, but those things that have the potential to be known, given the opportunity for them to emerge. And that is really what I think is so beautiful about all the stuff that you're saying that people find difficult, is that yes, what you're doing is wonderful. Yes, what the client is doing is wonderful. Yes, but what else is there that you don't know exists as yet? And that is what I think is part of the element of expertise, this deliberate practice.
And so, a couple concepts that we use to refer to this, because I will tell you, deliberate process is not for those with weak egos. It's brutal, because you're constantly focusing on your poor performance. Which is why it's critical, and why a good coach has a quality of keeping you out of the performance mode. You can't learn when you're performing. All you can do is adjust. Actors know that. Not when you're on the stage, not time to learn your part.
That's right. Yes.
Right? So you may be able to vary and improvise a bit, but within pretty strict limits at that moment. So when you're deliberately practicing, that's the time to be in the learning mode. And you'll know that you're in the learning mode because you're less concerned, A, about how you look to others. Right. And B, as a result, you experience less shame. When you're in the learning mode, then you feel guilt.
Yeah.
And you feel guilt because guilt is, I could do better if I tried.
Yeah.
And you're focused on yourself by contrast. And so one of those qualities that I look for in a coach, if I'm immediately flipped over into I'm not good enough, and believe me, I've had experiences with both, because as we've been writing and learning about deliberate practice, each of the members of the team has taken up some other activity and tried to apply the principles. So for a while, I was doing close-up sleight of hand. And I was working with several coaches around learning close-up. And I have to tell you, some would make comments and I would be right in the shame mode. And several times I got feedback. I never picked up that particular trick again. It was so hard.
Yes.
I've had others that keep me right at that sweet spot, in the learning, interested. And the good news about deliberate practice, while it can be hard on the ego, is that in time, it becomes self-reinforcing. Not deliberate practice itself, but the gradual improvement that you experience, that becomes rewarding in and of itself. It becomes something that you chase even in order to improve your results.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Matt, I know you've been having some internet ins and out there, so I've been having a lovely time with Scott.
Ins and outs. I've missed pretty much everything. I'm
sorry.
But fortunately, we can watch it again, like everybody, listen again, like everybody else. But have you got something that you've just been other than the panic of wondering where the hell you've gone in technical space?
Well, I had something about 15 minutes ago, but I'm pretty sure I've missed the boat on that one.
No, it might be still relevant, because we've been wandering around and framing these ideas. So I'm really interested in what you were thinking even back then, Matt. Although we might have lost him again. Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll probably edit that out. So when we're there, the how-to, the what-to, then the how-to. You've got the book, but you've also doing workshops now. Of course, you travel and do these workshops, but sorry about that for the moment. Now but I believe the next ones are actually in hometown. In Chicago.
The next Deliberate Practice Intensive, and I do that together with my colleague, Daryl Chow, who's one of the co-authors on the book. And also, how do I say this? Daryl has a deep personal understanding of deliberate practice. So let me tell you what's happening in the field right now. In 2007, we wrote an article called Super Shrinks that appeared in the Network, or you can get it for free on my website. It was the first
great
time.
Article.
Thank you very much for that. That was the first time in the history of the field the term deliberate practice had been used. And we reached out to Anders Ericsson, the Swedish psychologist who'd originally coined the term, and he really helped us, gave us direction about our research. Now that term is everywhere.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about it. It is the topic du jour among the Society for Society for Psychotherapy Research, SPR. Sorry,
and beautiful.
And but what's happening there is it's embedded right back into the medical view. So we're going to have books on deliberate practice for CBT, deliberate practice for EFT, deliberate practice for this model and that model, which really misses the point so terribly. So yes, Daryl and I have this intensive. It's a small group. It's run every summer in August. If the situation clears up, that's 2 days. And then the book, though, is laid out in a series of steps. And it's not meant to be, although it could be, but it's really not meant to be read from cover to cover.
Yeah.
It's meant to be read a chapter at a time. Most chapters are only about 10 to 12 pages.
Yeah.
And digested, activities follow, data is gathered, and then you move on to the next chapter. So it's meant to support you, because deliberate practice is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And keeping you engaged in that process is really what's key.
And I actually would love people to go and have a look at this book, at this film, Looking for Richard, that Al Pacino did, because it actually examples that greatly. They actually gave up producing Richard III as a full process, and they went into looking at this bit, and then emerging out of that something that worked. And certainly they produced some of the most interesting Shakespearean presentations that you could see. But when it comes back to this working with your these groups that you can, group supervision we call it, this opportunity not to drill down again, the tail has just got to stop thinking it's wagging the dog. As you say, this is what happens. Even though we've got deliberate practice, suddenly the tail says no, I've got control of it again. But this wonderful opportunity to showcase and experiment and get it wrong. Sit there with your colleagues and say, well, what if we did this? And then you maybe workshop it or something, and then go, oh God, no, that's terrible. And this is what you're saying. We need to get it wrong in practice a little bit more often than we get it wrong when we're actually working.
Well, this is where the learning versus performance mode distinction really becomes useful.
Right.
Because when you're in the performing mode, you will try to get it right. And we have some fairly good evidence that this is what causes most therapists' development to stop. Because in supervision, I'm talking about at the graduate school level, those being trained figure out what to say so that their supervisor doesn't pick up their errors.
Oh, yes.
And most of the time they succeed, sadly. And then they graduate, and not only have they become error phobic, but of course their errors were never addressed, and so those patterns become replicated over time and potentially hold them back. As I mentioned, one other thing is we're talking about errors because it really sounds again like we're not effective. We are effective, and deliberate practice is not a process that leads to dramatic improvements in outcome in a short run. What it does do, the data say, is cause improvements in outcome that are similar to what happens to Olympic athletes. So if you look at the improvement in most sports at the Olympic level, the improvements aren't in minutes and kilometers. They are in seconds and centimeters. And that's what we do with deliberate practice, but investing in that process over a long period of time, you end up dramatically more effective than than others.
And also errors can be surprising doorways that take you to expansions and changes and growth. Pat Ogden talks about this in relation to enactments. The old time, the transference, counter-transference. It was be that you would do a counter-transference, then you'd go off and have therapy and find out what's wrong with you, as different from, okay, that's interesting that counter-transference, that error was made, but what stimulated? Where did it come from? Can I learn from it? Which is, of course, what you do afterwards in deliberate practice. And you can actually be, so errors are, I agree with you, errors are not some things to be ashamed of. They're actually not categorically, but they're often the way in which we shift from familiarity and move into some things which are even better. Just a quick example, Ernie Rossi, using hypnotherapeutically, would say, and you can feel the magnetic pull between your hands, just like Mesmer was saying, and all those. And then he said, one day I forgot to say it, and people did stuff anyway. And he said, oh, my God, it was a mistake. It was actually an error to keep up this traditional, theoretically framed trance work. You know? So, So, and then suddenly we end up to the point where people say to me, you know, do you do trance work? And I say, no, I just do whatever the client wants to. Which quite often is to move into a focused set of attention. So, and this is also what you talk about in the framework of your workshops, and also I haven't read the book yet because it's not out.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
But
we're
very
still
soon,
arguing with the publisher to see if we can get it out. We do. If people pre-order the book, then I can tell you that we put your name on a list of insiders, the first 100 to do this, and we'll be doing a series of free webinars for those people who bought the book, and the publisher has agreed to distribute early electronic copies to aid in our discussions. So
fantastic. And that was the most clumsy segue that I've ever made, but it worked. Because it's slated for sort of May, but fantastic. And we have to probably wind up now, because I know that people's brains are starting to melt. I'm just starting to get excited. Patience. I will see you in December, viruses permitting, and I'll be coming up from doing some workshops in Brazil, which will be very exciting. So we fingers crossed for all of that. And Matt, I think I've dominated everything. Sorry about that, but. What do people need to know as far as where they go to after this and for further reference? Matt, fill us in with Scott's podcast page.
Right. Well, what we will do to make it easy for everyone, we'll leave a number of links in the show notes so that everybody can track down Scott and all of his wonderful material, and that will be in the show notes. So thank you, Scott Miller, so much for being with us here on the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. It was. We'll take this up again soon.
Perfect.
Bye for now.
Thanks for this opportunity again.